Jean-Claude Van Damme. Throughout my life, I've witnessed many fights. I've stepped into the ring, worked on film sets, and come face to face with genuine, unfiltered strength more times than I can count. But today, I'm not going to tell you my own story. I'm going to tell you about something that happened involving Keanu Reeves. I'm certain you've never heard this from anywhere else, because this story never made newspaper headlines, never reached television broadcasts. It traveled in whispers through Hollywood's narrow corridors, among people who trusted one another. I caught one of those whispers, and I have to pass this story on to you, because it will turn upside down most of what you think you know about power. It happened in the early 2000s at the Warner Brothers studio in Burbank, a Wednesday afternoon, as the California sun began stretching its shadows long across the lot. In the space of 10 seconds, a 15-year career was shaken to its foundation. A stuntman shoved Keanu Reeves as he was passing through a studio corridor. It wasn't a disagreement. It wasn't anger boiling over. It was the stuntman's palm flat against Keanu Reeves's chest, deliberate, fully intentional in front of witnesses. It didn't go the way the stuntman had planned. Within 10 seconds, he was on the ground, twice. Clint Eastwood watched every moment of it, and for a long time, he didn't say a word. I'm Van Damme, and every time I think about that scene, something stirs inside me, because I know what that man was feeling. That sense of certainty, that belief of I will win. And I know how that belief can shatter at exactly the worst possible moment. I've lost at least 50 fights where I was absolutely certain I'd walk away the winner. The stuntman's name was Boone Rader. Anyone who worked in Hollywood action cinema knew that name. 6 feet 3 inches tall, 260 pounds. Massive. He had built a recognized career over 15 years in the stunt business. Car crashes, building falls, fire sequences. The scar along his forearm was from a shoot in New Mexico, a scene where something went slightly wrong. His shoulder had slipped out of joint on more than one production. A knuckle on his right hand had healed badly and stayed that way. He wore these marks like badges because to him, that's exactly what they were. In this business, you were supposed to carry those scars. He wasn't Clint Eastwood's bodyguard. That distinction mattered to him more than he ever said out loud. He was a stunt consultant, someone who understood how dangerous sequences actually worked, not someone who watched from the safety of a monitor, but someone who knew from the inside. Something had been quietly growing inside Boone for months. After The Matrix, the industry had changed, and that change bothered Boone. Keanu Reeves was everywhere now. Magazine profiles, press junkets, interview after interview. Disciplined, genuinely skilled, completely dedicated to Hollywood, as if months of training explained everything. Boone had friends who had worked on that production. He knew the wire rigs, the camera angles. He was aware of the weeks, sometimes months of preparation. He knew the people who built the physical language of every scene and then stepped aside. He also knew who collected the money and the praise, the name on the poster, always. He had never given that feeling a name, but it was there, settled quietly, the way things settle when they've been sitting in the same place long enough. The afternoon had arrived. The meeting had run long. As Clint and Boone crossed the studio lot, the light had dropped and softened. Near stage 9, 40 feet ahead, a man stood talking. Black t-shirt, faded jeans worn from actual use, running shoes that had clearly been used for running. No assistant beside him, no manager. Just a man having a conversation, entirely at ease. Clint raised a hand. Keanu turned. A moment of recognition, then a genuine smile. Not the kind assembled for cameras. The kind that comes naturally when you're truly glad to see someone. They shook hands and embraced. Two men who had worked in the same industry long enough that genuine respect required no close friendship to justify it. "This is Boone Rader," said Clint. "Works with me on the action side. One of the best in the business." Keanu extended his hand. "Good to meet you." Boone didn't extend his. He left his hands at his side. After a pause that lasted just long enough to feel deliberate, long enough to make a point, he gave a single slow nod, as if acknowledging him from a distance. That was all. Keanu lowered his hand. It had stung him. A stuntman he'd never met had refused to shake his hand. On the street, that had a meaning, and Keanu came from the street. He acted as though it hadn't mattered and let his hand fall. Boone started talking, as if to cut through the tension in the air. "The Matrix was something remarkable," he said. "The choreography, the camera work, the wire rigs, all working in perfect harmony, allowing audiences to believe what they want to see rather than what's actually happening in front of the lens. Measured, reasonable, delivered in the tone of someone offering context context the other person might find useful. It wasn't a compliment. Everyone present understood that without needing it explained. But the truly shocking thing was that Boone didn't stop there. He had given 15 years to this industry, he said. Real impacts, real injury, risks that no camera angle could soften and no second take could undo. He and people like him were the reason these kinds of films could exist at all. And when audiences walked out of theaters talking about how convincing the action was, the conversation always landed in the same place. The name on the poster. Never the names of the people who made it possible. The stuntman behind the scene. The one who actually lived it. He wasn't wrong. That was the thing. There was truth in it. Real truth, earned through 15 years of genuinely dangerous work for modest pay and almost no public recognition. The problem wasn't what he was saying. It was what he was doing with it, where he was aiming it. Clint said Boone's name. Quietly. Just his name. The way you say it when you need someone to hear the thing beneath the word rather than the word itself. Boone didn't look at him. He took one step forward. A step that closed the distance between himself and Keanu by a precise and deliberate amount. He placed his palm flat against Keanu's chest and shoved him. Hard. It wasn't a punch. It wasn't designed to injure. But it wasn't gentle either. The kind of push that carries a specific, legible message. That the person delivering it is larger, heavier, more experienced in the physical grammar of confrontation. And that the person receiving it should feel all three of those things in the 2 steps backward it was built to produce. Keanu didn't take those 2 steps. He didn't take one. When I first heard that detail, I stopped. Because I understand it. The weight, the momentum, the pressure of 260 pounds, and Keanu standing still. That wasn't coincidence. That was something years of training had taught the body. His weight was already low and settled in a way that had nothing performative about it. Not a stance, nothing announcing readiness. Just the grounded balance of someone whose body had learned, without waiting for conscious instruction, how to receive force without surrendering ground. Keanu spoke, quietly, directly, his eyes on Boone and nowhere else. Are you sure you want to do this? No threat, no performance of calm. Just a question asked the way you ask something when you genuinely want the other person to have thought it through before they answer. Boone held his gaze. I haven't been this sure about anything in a long time. Keanu looked at him for one more moment. Then he nodded. Not agreement, confirmation. The confirmation of something he had already half expected. He suggested they go inside. Stage 14 was empty today. Enough space, enough privacy. That was all. No drama, no arrogance, no indication that walking toward this concerned him in any way that mattered. This wasn't a retreat. Keanu was choosing the terms. And in doing so, quietly and without announcement, he had already taken something from the encounter that Boone hadn't yet realized was available to be taken. The door to stage 14 was metal gray, slightly rusted at the lower hinge. Keanu pushed it. It opened with a low groan. Inside was dark, the darkness of a large space that hasn't been used in a while. The ceiling disappeared 50 feet overhead. Equipment along the walls lay covered in canvas drop cloths. Cables coiled in broad loops across the concrete floor. The smell of dust and old metal. Keanu walked to the center of the floor. He turned, and he waited. He didn't take a stance, didn't raise his hands, said nothing. Just stood, feet roughly shoulder-width apart, hands loose at his sides, his center of gravity naturally low. Not advertising what came next. He looked like someone who wasn't ready, like a man waiting for a bus. But to anyone who knew what they were looking at, this was readiness in its fullest form. Boone handed his jacket to Clint without looking at him. He rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, drew a slow breath. 15 years of preparation, ritual running its sequence without conscious thought. He wasn't nervous. He hadn't been nervous in a physical confrontation in a very long time. What he felt was certainty, the particular kind that arrives when a person has already decided how something ends. Whenever you're ready, said Keanu. Boone moved. Fast. Genuinely fast in the way that always surprised people who thought they knew what 260 pounds would cost a man in speed. He threw a left jab first, not committed, not meant to land, just measuring. Keanu's head moved 2 inches to the right. The jab found air. Boone planted his back foot and drove forward with a straight right hand. His full weight, his full intention, the accumulated force of someone who had spent years learning to deliver exactly this kind of punch. The kind that, if it connects, ends the conversation before anyone else says another word. Keanu rotated his left shoulder forward by a quarter turn. Nothing more. The punch passed close enough that the displacement of air would have been perceptible. It found nothing. And then there was a contact at Boone's right forearm. Light, almost polite. The kind of touch that in any other context wouldn't have registered as worth noticing. But it wasn't a grab. It was a guide. And in the fractional second that followed, followed, threw a hip throw executed with the clean precision of something drilled, until the mechanics had stopped being conscious decision and simply became how the body moved. Boone's own forward momentum became the instrument of what happened next. His feet left the ground, the ceiling appeared briefly in his field of vision. Then the concrete arrived, 260 pounds, hard floor. The sound filled the entire soundstage and traveled through the floor and up through the feet of every person standing at its edges. Wait, don't miss this moment. I'm Van Damme, and let me tell you, it's not that sound that stays with me. It's the silence that followed, because inside that silence, what Boone did next tells you everything. Instinct took over. 15 years of instinct. Already pushing to one knee, his hand shot out and closed around Keanu's ankle. His fingers wrapped completely around the joint. His intention was immediate and simple. Pull. Destabilize. Bring this to the ground where size and weight could renegotiate the terms. Keanu didn't resist it. He dropped, didn't fall, dropped. Deliberate, controlled. His entire body descending in a single fluid movement that used the grip itself as an anchor and rotated cleanly around it. In the same motion, continuous and unbroken, a clean sweep at Boone's base leg. Boone went down a second time, harder. Keanu stepped back 2 paces. He wasn't breathing hard. His expression hadn't changed. Nothing in his face performed victory for the people watching. The same unhurried stillness that had been present since he walked through the door. 10 seconds. And in those 10 seconds, everything had been said. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. Clint Eastwood stood against the wall, arms still crossed, but something behind his eyes had shifted. A man who had spent 4 decades playing characters defined by a specific and recognizable kind of strength, the kind that announces itself, that knows it fills a room and is aware of knowing it. And he had just watched something he had never had a character for. Strength with no interest in announcing itself. Capability that didn't need to be recognized as capability in order to function as capability. Could someone get him some water? Said Keanu, his eyes still on Boone. The same quiet voice, the same level tone. He'll be dizzy when he sits up. Boone lay on the concrete, running the entire sequence again in his mind. The jab, the right hand, the arm contact, the throw, the grip, the drop, the sweep. He ran it from the beginning, looking for the point where a different decision might have produced a different result. He couldn't find it. That, more than the impact, more than the dust still settling around him, was what held him there. He sat up slowly. When his eyes found Keanu, they hadn't lost their edge. Do it again, he said. Keanu didn't answer immediately. Do it again. Something underneath the words now. Not quite anger, not quite desperation, but the specific combination that arrives when a man needs a second chance, not to win, but to understand. Keanu shook his head slowly, without apology. Nothing changes if we do it again, Boone. The same things happen for the same reasons. A rematch doesn't answer the question you're actually asking. Clint stepped forward, not loudly, just present. His hand came to rest on Boone's shoulder with the quiet authority of someone who knows the difference between a moment that needs to continue and one that needs to stop. The tension in Boone's frame shifted, didn't disappear, settled. Near the wall, half covered by a canvas drop cloth, was a low wooden equipment crate. Keanu walked over, pulled the cloth aside, and sat down with the same unhurried ease he brought to everything. He rested his forearms on his knees and looked at Boone. Can I tell you something? Not about the fight, something else. Boone said nothing, but he was listening. When I started training for the Matrix, I thought I understood what I was walking into. About a month in, I realized I didn't understand anything. Not the movements, the principles behind them. Why certain things work in certain situations and fail in others. Every day I trained, the primary thing I learned was how much I still didn't know. He paused. There's a difference between training until something looks real and training until something is real. One of those has a ceiling you eventually reach and stop. The other one doesn't. Then more directly, do you know what I saw when you came at me? Certainty. Complete certainty. You already knew how this was going to end. And I understand that certainty. It's kept you functional in work that would have broken someone less sure, but in this room it made you rigid. When you committed to that right hand, you'd already written the next line. You couldn't adapt because you'd already decided what came next. I didn't fight your strength. I followed the direction you had already chosen. I'm Van Damme, and let me tell you, that sentence stuck with me. I didn't fight your strength. I followed the direction you had already chosen. This isn't just about martial arts. This is life. I've fought against my own certainty more times than I can count. I've been put on the floor by my own momentum, because I'd already decided where I was going and I couldn't change it. What Keanu did in stage 14 wasn't just winning, it was staying afterward. He sat down on a wooden crate. He spoke honestly, not from above, from the same level. And he gave the man who had just tried to humiliate him the space to grow. A few weeks later, Boone sent a message through Clint, brief and direct. He wasn't looking for a rematch. He just had questions, and he thought only one person could answer them honestly. Keanu agreed, without conditions. They met on a Saturday morning at a small training facility in Glendale. They talked for nearly 2 hours, not about technique, about the things that live underneath technique. Certainty built from things you've already encountered is different from certainty about things you haven't, said Keanu. The first one is experience. The second is assumption. An assumption is expensive because you pay for it exactly when you can least afford to. Before they left, Boone said something he hadn't planned to say when he walked through the door. For 15 years, I was very good at my job. And for most of that time, I confused being good at my job with being right about everything adjacent to it. Those aren't the same thing. I wish I'd seen that distinction earlier. Keanu nodded. Seeing that clearly is not a small thing. I'm Van Damme. And when I first heard this story, I went quiet for a while. Because Boone Raider wasn't a villain. He was capable, real, proven. And he made the mistake that capable people are perhaps most vulnerable to, believing that what they've built is a complete picture, when in fact it was only one perspective on an incomplete one. Most of us make some version of that mistake, usually in the domain where we feel most competent, usually without realizing it until something makes it impossible to look away. What Keanu did wasn't simply win. The important thing was what those 10 seconds made possible afterward. He sat down on a crate in stage 14 and spoke honestly, without superiority, without performance, to a man who had just tried to humiliate him. That was a choice. The kind that requires a security that has nothing to do with what you can do in a fight. And when Clint Eastwood walked out of stage 14 that day, he carried something with him. Quietly, not publicly. Some things you don't talk about. You just let them change you slowly in the places where real change happens. I'm Van Damme, and this is the most honest story about strength I have ever heard. What about you? In which area of your life are you acting like Boone Raider right now? When did your certainty blind you? Write it in the comments.